my name is Lori and welcome to my channel. So this week I thought that we would do a skull cake. Now my mom bought this pan for me about a year ago. I've been dying to use it. So I thought that we would do like a zombie, kind of really gory, kind of Walking Dead thing for Halloween. So let's get started.
So this is the pan here, and as you can see, it kind of looks creepy by itself. And I'll leave a link in my description where you can buy this cake pan. And I've already baked my cake. I baked a red velvet cake, so that way when you crack open the cake and you cut it, it's all red inside, kind of like blood. So I'm going to stick the back of my skull to my cake board, and I've got 2 dowels. I'm just going to stick those into my cake, and that's so the top part of my skull can sit into those dowels without kind of sliding around. So you just want to take your top part of your cake and just kind of push that into place. Once it's in place, you're ready to crumb coat the cake. So I'm just using buttercream icing, and with my spatula, I'm going to crumb coat as much as I can and just give it kind of a thin crumb coat around the whole skull. For the places that I can't reach, like in his eye sockets, in his mouth and everything, what I found worked was using a paintbrush. And I'm just going to take the paintbrush and use my buttercream icing and just kind of paint on the icing. Then I stuck it in the freezer for about 5 minutes to firm up, and then I just kind of smoothed it with my finger. And that's what I found gave it a nice smooth crumb coat all over the places that I couldn't really reach. When you're done, it should look something like this. So I'm just rolling out my fondant, and I've colored my fondant almost like a flesh skin tone, but a little bit more yellow than normal. And I'm just going to roll that over my cake, and I'm using a chunk of fondant and icing sugar to help push the fondant into the eye sockets and cheek sockets and all those different crevices of the face. And you want to really just gently ease the fondant into those places, otherwise your fondant's going to rip and tear. And even though it's a gory skull, you don't want your fondant to rip and tear before you're ready to gorify it up. So just be careful with this process. And I'm just using my hand to help pull the fondant out and then push it in around his head, just kind of like you would normally cover a cake. And that's it. You're just kind of pulling it out and pushing it in with your hand and wrapping it around the whole skull. And then you can just smooth it out a little bit. Now I'm just going to take a paring knife and do a rough cut and get some of that excess fondant off. And I'm going to take my paring knife again and just do kind of a closer cut towards his skull. Now with my balling tool, I'm going to start shaping his face a little bit more. So I'm going to push a little bit deeper into his eye sockets, as well as his cheek and his nose. And you're just going to create those basic features. And then we can go from there. And for his mouth, I'm using my veining tool, and I'm just going to create kind of the outside of his mouth. And then for his teeth, I use the veining tool as well. I just kind of carved out where his teeth are going to be. And I'm just going to use my fingers and kind of create more of his facial features, like his eyebrow lines and stuff. And with my balling tool again, I'm going to really gorify this part of his face. So what I was shooting for is for like half of his jaw to be missing. So I thought if I just kind of extended down where his mouth line would be, I'm just really easing it with my balling tool and feeling out how far I can go with the fondant without it tearing. But I'm just pushing in where I want the fondant to kind of go about. I'm using my veining tool. I'm just going to create some kind of gashes and wounds and cuts along his skull. Now I've taken a strip of fondant and I'm just rolling along the edges and leaving the center with kind of a high peak. I'm going to wet it with water and then stick it on the top of my skull. Wet along the whole edge of it with water, and then you can kind of smooth it in with a spatula, just so you don't see those kind of harsh lines. And this is going to be for a big kind of gash along the side of his head. So I'm just going to take an X-Acto knife and cut along that. Then you just want to open up the wound, like he's been cut along the side of his head and he's got this big open gash along the side of his head. And this piece is going to be for his neck. So I've just rolled out a log of fondant and I'm just really pushing down and making a rough edge with my hand. And then I'm going to wrap that around his head. Now I'm using my stitching tool and I'm just going to rough up his face a little bit. So where I've already made cuts, I'm just going to really rough it up so that way it's not smooth flesh. That was kind of, I don't know, rotten flesh or torn flesh or something like that. And do the same thing around his mouth. And this is how I'm going to start creating more of those cuts and wounds around his head. So I'm going to give him a big cut along the back of his head. And same thing, just roughing it up with my stitching tool. And then with my balling tool, I'm just going to rough up the rest of his face a little bit so it's not as smooth and even. So it has more of a nice texture to it. I'm just using gray color dust and I'm just going to kind of give him more of a gray look so he doesn't look as yellow. I want him to look more dead and scary. So I'm going to give him more of a gray tone to him. So just want to do that all along his head. And I'm going to give my zombie one eye. So I rolled out a little ball of white fondant. I'm going to stick that in his eye socket. And then dust around the eye socket with black color dust. You want to do that with both eye sockets. And his nose. And now I'm using white paint, white edible paint, and I'm going to paint his teeth white. And then once that white has dried, we'll paint them yellow. I'm going to paint the inside of his mouth black. And then any kind of deep socket in his face, anything that I want a little bit more depth to, I'm going to paint black, and that's going to give it more of that three-dimensional feel. And with any of the paints that I'm using today, I'm just using a gel paste food coloring, and I'm using some alcohol and diluting my gel paste down a little bit, depending on how dark I want my colors. And that's how I'm using it to paint and do all the colors. So again, with black, we're just painting along all the different crevices and cuts and wounds. His nose and his eye, just to make it look like deep sockets. And for his eye, I'm going to give him green eyes. So I'm using green food coloring and painting the outside of his eye. And then I'll just paint the center of it black. I'm just using some red food coloring and just going to paint those little lines that you get, I guess, on eyeballs. I don't really know what they're called. They're not veins, but you know what I'm talking about. And I'm going to give him some hair and some eyebrows. And now I'm going to color my teeth more yellow because I don't think my zombie should have stark white teeth. They don't brush their teeth, I don't think, so give him more brown yellow teeth. Oh, and I'm going to extend my teeth down into my jawline right there. Now, this part of the shading, when you usually have a cut or a wound, it's kind of like infected and irritated skin. So it's the same thing I'm going to do with my zombie. So anywhere I've created a gash or a wound or a cut, I'm just going to use some pink food coloring and just make almost like an irritation area around it. Now using maroon food coloring, I'm going to give more of that blood, that old kind of crusted blood inside of all the crevices. And you're just going to go along all your cuts and just gore him up a little bit and make him a little bit more bloody. And I learned how to do all this watching different makeup tutorials and stuff, Halloween, glorified makeup zombie tutorials, and I learned a lot about shading and toning and coloring. So I'm just trying to apply those same things to my skull. So just doing it in steps. So you make all the cuts and the wounds, and then you make it look more irritated, then you can start adding your blood. That's more of a muscle, I guess, that's been exposed. Still using the maroon. Once you're done with the maroon, I'm going to start with red food coloring. This is where he looks like with just the maroon and just the pink food coloring. Now the third color will be red. I'm using a super red food coloring. I'm going to go over the whole area with red just to brighten it up a little bit and give it that almost fresh blood look. Obviously, you don't have to do every step that I did here. It just depends on how detailed and how realistic you want your zombie to look. But go nuts and have a lot of fun with it, because I really did. It was kind of scaring me while I was working at it. It's like, oh my God, he's looking terrifying. Give him more blood dripping down his mouth like he just ate someone. This is really kind of Walking Dead inspired. There's been a lot of zombie movies and last scare of like a zombie apocalypse or whatever. So thought I'd make him very zombie, like he's eating someone. More red food coloring around. And then I took a sea sponge and I'm just going to rough up the rest of his face a little bit with blood so it's not clean cut. I mean, you wouldn't just have blood just on your cuts, it would kind of be scattered around. So this step is optional. If you don't like the look of this, then you can skip it all together. And after that, we're on to the last step, and that would be just some red food coloring that I've added to some gel paste. And that's going to be a lot more of the 3D blood compared to just 2D painted. So I'm just going to give him some drips around his mouth and his eye sockets and different cuts and wounds and give him more of that it's just fresh kind of blood look. And the gel paste and food coloring really does look really realistic as blood. I'm going to drip that around his head all over. And then give him a nice puddle of blood around his head, around his mouth kind of area. Just use a paintbrush to paint it out a bit so it's a big puddle of blood. Definitely don't show this cake to your kids. You might terrify them. And that's it. That's what it looks like when your zombie's all done. He's all glorified and scary looking, very creepy. Very Halloween. This is by far the scariest cake I've ever made.
I'm so happy with the way this cake turned out. I've never made anything like it. And actually, to make the cake, I couldn't find any really tutorials or anything how to make like zombie or blood, or so I ended up watching some Halloween makeup tutorials, and that's how I learned to shade it and do everything the way I did. I hope that you guys really enjoyed my method, and I hope my zombie didn't spook you out too much. Anyways, if you're new to my channel, welcome. I put out new cake decorating videos every Tuesday, and I would love for you guys to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy Halloween!